Hi, everybody. Thanks, Will. Thanks for inviting me to share my thoughts on a very important topic. I just want to get rid of this. Yeah, so you might be wondering, why we should worry about this, why we should worry about the role of emotions and what's wrong with teens and what's that got to do with language teaching in the first place. After all, teaching is just getting the content, across, isn't it? Well, I don't think so. I think there's a lot more to teaching than just working on content. In fact, I would say that one of the problems with teacher training programs, with very few notable exceptions, is that there is too much emphasis on the what, on the content, and not enough emphasis on the who. And by who, I mean the people in the classroom, and that's the students, of course, but it's also us, the teachers. I don't know if you notice what we human beings too. And so our emotions, need to be taken into account as well. So wonderful to see you all, and I'm so glad that so many people from different parts of the world have decided to join us this afternoon for me, but it may be morning for a lot of you. So what are we going to talk about? Well, this is pretty much what I was thinking about doing with you. So first of all, we're going to talk about the what's wrong with teens. Okay, what is the problem with teens? Then we're going to talk about the role that emotions play in learning and teaching, in any educational endeavor. Zoom in to sell, social and emotional learning and emotional intelligence, which are two of the most commonly used acronyms in our field these days. And so and what can SEL do? What can emotional intelligence do to help students and teenagers, cope with their own feelings? What is the role of the teacher in this process? So what can we do? Is there anything that we can do, anything we should do? So I will sketch out a few ideas, and then the more practical part of the webinar will be devoted to strategies, and by strategies I mean both teacher communication styles and things the way we communicate with our students, but also activities that we can ask our students to do in class to promote SEL. I want to say right at the outset that I'm not going to suggest a SEL or emotional intelligence is something that you do in 45 minutes. Okay, so in fact, one of the greatest misconceptions about this is that it's you teach the curriculum and then you teach SEL if you have time on a Friday afternoon because the sun is out, off we go to the beach. No, that's not the way it works. I really believe that for SEL to be effective, it needs to be embedded, okay, within the curriculum. And in fact, one of the things that I like about the Macmillan series, get involved, is exactly that. Because if you look at the syllabus, if you look at the units, there is a curriculum per se. There's a language curriculum, but there's also a SEL curriculum, and the two go hand in hand, parallel and apart, together. And I love that. So So what is wrong with our teens? Well, there's nothing wrong, really. I mean, in the sense, that there's no problem with being a teenager, and that being a teenager is not a syndrome, being a teenager is not a disease, but it is a very difficult time. And we've all been teenagers, we probably, we have memories, what it was like, to go through to navigate the changes from puberty to pre-adolescence, adolescence, and the reason for this is basically boils down to hormonal and neurological changes. Okay, so there is a hormonal storm, going on, especially at age 12 for girls and 13 and 14 for boys, it would seem. So neurological because the brain is not fully developed. And in fact, the brain, won't be fully developed until we hit age 25. So that's what neuroscience says. It's also a time of our life where emotionality is at its peak. And that explains, why teenagers, are so emotional, and they get so emotional about everything. This is serious because, although, the emotionality is at its peak, the adolescents, don't have the right emotional and intellectual strategies, to manage their emotions. And so that's why, and this is going to have an impact on the judgment. That's why, sometimes, they take silly decisions, or sometimes, reckless decisions. It's a time, where students and adolescents, have a lot of pressure. So family, school, peer pressure, they need to look a certain way, they need to behave a certain way, they need to feel like, they belong, because if they don't belong, they're outcasts. So that puts a lot of pressure on them. There's a time of stress. It's a time of anxiety, especially, after the horrific pandemic that we all went through. A lockdown, has had some serious effects on everybody, but primarily on our adolescents. There's studies in the US that show that a lot of adolescents were reluctant to go back to school because they didn't want to leave the safety of their cocoon. It's called separation anxiety, except separation anxiety is usually something that kicks in at age 5 or 6. So this we're talking here about kids of 12, 13 years old. So that is how messed up some people's brain was during the lockdown, and as a result of the lockdown and COVID. It's also a time where body changes, so and it's worse for girls because the changes are public, are visible, and so that creates extra anxiety, extra pressure, extra stress. And finally, it is a time of our life when we try to affirm ourselves as our own as our own selves. It's a question. It's an issue that psychologists call individuation. So I'm trying to find my marks, and I'm trying to find out who I am and assert my individuality, if that's a word. So when you put all these things together, it's quite a tall order, and I think that the thing to remember here is that an adolescent, almost by definition, doesn't have the strategies, doesn't have the tool to make sense of all of this. So because the brain is still developing. So it is clear to me why we should help them. We know, for example, from research, that when we experience a lot of feelings, okay, let's take negative feelings for now, anxiety or stress. Okay, we're not in the best ideal situation for learning. If you're stressed out, for example, okay, you're in a fight or flight mode. Okay, you want to get out of here. Okay, you're not in a, oh, let's learn something new mode. Okay, so stress doesn't help people learn. Okay, for a lot of different reasons. Similarly, though, we can say that positive feelings have an impact on learning. So if you're feeling curious about something, if you're feeling stimulated, well, then you're really looking forward to school and to the lesson in general. So what are the messages here? Well, first of all, let me tell you one thing. If a student is experiencing a feeling of curiosity, okay, literally the brains, the part of the brains, the areas of the brain that are responsible for learning, okay, light up. There is a lot of research that shows that's the case. So what are the messages from all this? Well, number one, we have to learn and have to teach our students how to manage the stress effectively. Number two, we have to provide them with a safe environment. We have to foster an environment, that is conducive to trust, to acceptance, okay, to a feeling of affiliation. Affiliation is when there is a palpable sense of belonging, when there is when the kids feel like, yes, okay, fine, I've found my place here. I'm accepted by the others. I accept everybody else. The teacher is accepting me. I'm accepting the teacher. So I feel good here. I'm already looking forward to our next class. That's called affiliation. Just for your information, the opposite of affiliation is alienation. And you don't want to teach somebody who's feeling alienated. When you're feeling alienated, you feel like you don't belong to the group. And if you don't feel like you belong to the group, okay, so there's no learning that could take place. It's as simple as that. So that's the second message. So provide the kids, with the safe, stress-free environment. And the third messages, to create opportunities, creating learning opportunities that are conducive to curiosity and inspiration. When the kids are curious and inspired, okay, well then, this is where you hit them, with some serious learning. So how do emotions impact our learning? Well, we know for a fact, that despite what people were thinking up until 10 years ago, that the learning was primarily cognitive endeavor. In fact, it doesn't seem to be the case. So emotions impact learning in 4 different ways. Okay, so psychological, when you feel good about something, when you're experiencing positive emotions, okay, well then you look forward to school. You want to be in school. You want to be in class with your students, okay, with your mates. And so there is when you feel like you're operating, you're working in an environment that is stress-free, you're more motivated because the teacher managed to create a motivating environment. A motivating environment is an environment whereby kids feel like they can motivate themselves. Because maybe there's no judgment, there is no stress, okay, there's trust, there is respect, there is acceptance. Okay, so obviously if all these factors are present, well then the engagement is going to go through the roof. It also means emotions impact learning in the sense that the quality of the relationship is better, and so the group is more together, the group is more cohesive, so there's more of a sense of connectedness. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, attention, memory, and learning are actually regulated by our emotions. So it would seem as if our friend Descartes, the guy who used to say, "I think, therefore I am," well, after all, he was wrong. So Antonio Damasio, a very knowledgeable neuroscientist, UC San Diego, he wrote a book a while ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. The book is titled, Descartes' Error, because in fact, we don't take decisions with our brain, it turns out, for example, but we take decisions with our well, it's not either or, in fact, but it's a more balanced view on how people think and how people feel. And so in any case, attention, memory, learning are regulated by the quality of our emotions. I have to say, before we move on, that there's no such thing as positive or negative emotions. Emotions are best looked at as in terms of pleasant or unpleasant. Okay, so on the one hand you have pleasant, unpleasant. At the other end of the spectrum you have energy. So even an unpleasant emotion is not always necessarily negative. Anxiety is not always necessarily negative. For example, if I'm too anxious about catching COVID, okay, well then that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that could make me social distant. So that can make me more aware of the fact I have to keep my distance from other people. If I'm too stressed in a situation of danger, well, that stress could be a signal that I have to be more alert. Okay, so if I see a bear 20 feet from me, I better be stressed, okay, because that means that I gotta know what to do. Okay, so so it's not always necessarily negative. So we have to be careful not to lump everything together, and it's no doom and gloom. So here's the question, if you ask your students, if you ask your adolescents, like a lot of researchers have done, how they're feeling today, most students, actually the correct statistics is 60%, sometimes 65%. This is what they say: I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling disengaged. Now, what's important for us educators to notice, as everybody knows, is that if you're feeling tired, stressed, anxious, and disengaged, there's no learning that could take place, obviously. So our job is to come up with strategies to maximize the student's cognitive efficiency. So if you're feeling tired, if you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling all these unpleasant feelings, okay, then the brain is not ready for learning. And so if you teach somebody who's feeling tired, stressed, etc., well, then nothing is going to sink in, nothing is going to register. But it's nobody's fault. It's not your fault. It's not their fault either. So what can we do? Exactly. So what's the question? The question is, how can I help my teens maximize the cognitive efficiency? Cognitive efficiency is just not just linked to learning per se, but it's also about, linked to making the right decisions, okay, in class and also outside class. So we have a role to play. Okay, so we have a role to play. So what can we do? Enter emotional intelligence. I know that emotional intelligence, is a household concept nowadays. Okay, but let me tell you, what emotional intelligence is not. Emotional intelligence doesn't pose it that everybody needs to feel happy all the time, no matter what. Nobody ever said that. Okay, but that's a gross misinterpretation of the whole concept. Emotional intelligence is just, it's a cluster of skills. It's not just one ability, but it's a cluster of skills that we need to identify and manage our emotions, and also be able to to read some other people's emotions. Okay, so that's what EI is all about. And the process through which children acquire AI is called SEL, or SEL, which is, I bet it's another acronym that you're familiar with. Okay, so how can we teach people to problem solving, through SEL in 45 minutes? It cannot be done. This is what I was saying right at the beginning. Okay, so bear with me. It's very important, that the SEL is not done piecemeal. It's not done on a Friday afternoon, but it's got to be done in parallel and at the same time, along with the curriculum that you're focusing on. So let me say a few more words about AI. Emotional intelligence is not genetic. It's not in your blood. It's not in your DNA. You're not born with it. Okay, it's not a fixed unitary trait. Okay, it is something that you develop. Okay, it's a dynamic concept. Okay, it's just like intelligence, like general intelligence, and it's like creativity. Nobody's born creative, nobody's born intelligent. Everybody's born intelligent, but in various different ways. Okay, so that means that you can actually, that intelligence too is a dynamic phenomenon. So emotional intelligence consists of 4 different elements, but they're all intertwined. Okay, so it's self-awareness. So I'm aware of my feelings at this precise moment in time. Okay, so because I have that kind of awareness, I can manage my feeling. Okay, so I can understand, where that feeling is coming from. Okay, and what I can do, whether I want to stay in that feeling or whether I want to step out of that feeling. Okay, but it's also, being aware of the others. Okay, so being able to read the room. Okay, and read other people's feelings, which is, as for teachers, for anybody working with people, this is like the quintessential skill. If I know how other people are feeling, or perhaps, I can manage my relationship with them, and I can enhance, the quality of the relationship that I have with these people. So this is what emotional intelligence consists of. Okay, I said it before. The most important thing by far is that emotions are data. Emotions need to be looked at as valuable information. Okay, and we need to pay attention to what an emotion is telling us, because there is an emotion behind any type of behavior. So somebody, misbehaving in my class, somebody, looking apathetic, or looking at the window, or doodling all the time, or never making eye contact. Well, let's not jump to conclusions and assume, for example, that he's not motivated, or he doesn't want to be here. Okay, let's not do that. Let's hold our horses for a second. Okay, there is an emotion behind this person's behavior. So what is it? So if you want to fix it, well, if you don't know the nature of the problem, you can't fix it. And the nature of the problem, quote unquote, is often, if not always, an emotion. So this is what Dr. Lisa Bartlett Feldman said about, learning, memory, and attention regulated by emotion. So this is how important this stuff is. Okay, so and it really, it makes me sad, when I hear people say, well, I'm a teacher, just has to focus on content. This stuff is not peripheral. This stuff is actually very central, because if you don't help the students deal with their own emotions, there's no learning, there's no memory, there's no attention. How can you learn anything if your memory is impaired, or if you're not paying attention, if you're not focused? I mean, you tell me. So for me, this is very central. So what's our main goal? Well, the goal of a self-infused teaching, if you will, is to help the students reach an emotional balance. Okay, so when students are when students have reached an emotional balance, well, then they're at peace with their own emotions. Okay, so they can understand what it is that they're feeling, and how they can use that feeling to their own advantage. So it's hard work. Okay, it's not something that you do in 24 hours just like this. Okay, it's not, and it's hard work, and it's long term. Okay, it takes time, but you know what, life takes time. Have you ever thought about that? So in education, there are no quick fixes. In education, okay, we're talking about changes here. Any tiny little change in education never really works as fireworks. Okay, it works as a fuse. Okay, so changes need time to be implemented for a lot of different reasons we're not going to go into here, because otherwise we need 3 hours. So I just want to conclude this first section of my webinar. Okay, so I said, I hope I've been able to highlight the strong link that there is between people's emotions and any learning endeavor. So here we're talking about learning languages, but I mean it's any learning in nothing in not one subject in particular. We also said the emotions are data and need to be treated as information. So emotion is trying to tell us something. An emotion is trying to tell us what's wrong, what's going on. Okay, and our goal as educators is to teach kids how to reach that emotional balance, without which no learning could actually take place. So I'm going to stop here for 45 seconds, okay? And I'm sure you have questions. I'm sure you have doubts. I'm sure there's stuff that you want me to clarify. Well, jot things down in the chat box. And at the end of this talk, okay, so in approximately half an hour, I'd be happy to try and see, how many of your questions, can address. Okay, 45 seconds from now. So what are the strategies that we can use? Well, I think the most, well, not the most important, but the foundational skill of emotional intelligence, the very pillar of emotional intelligence, is self-awareness. Antonio Damasio says so himself. Okay, so use self-awareness to tune into the feelings of the moment. So it's important. Sometimes, when students they walk into a classroom, they look distracted, so they're not with us. Okay, so I think our job is to not to plunge into teaching right away, but to give students a little bit of time to tune in. Okay, so self-awareness is actually being able to identify the emotions you're experiencing at that precise moment, so that you can then reach, hopefully, a state of neuroharmony or flow. Flow is when you basically when you're doing a task and you're so immersed in it that you become oblivious to everybody and everything around you, which is any teacher's holy grail. Okay, so flow basically means maximum concentration, maximum focus. Okay, so Damasio says, feelings come first, words later. You will see why this is so important. So the question is, how are you feeling? it's very important, to be able to identify and label our emotions, okay, with a very high degree of precision. One of the problems that we have, not just adolescents, but adults as well, is that, we don't have, when somebody says, when somebody asks, oh, how you doing today? Well, most of the time, what do we say? We say good, busy, not bad. Okay. So, and if you think about it, okay, those terms are really, really super vague. Okay. So we have to understand one thing, that just like sciences or mathematics, for example, emotions they have their own vocabulary. And so the more precise you are about, the kind of feeling that you experience at any given moment in time, the better off you will be. I'll explain. There is a difference between stressed and overwhelmed. Can you see what it is? So if you're feeling stressed, okay, perhaps, physical exercise will help, meditation will help, mindfulness techniques will help. If you're feeling overwhelmed, however, okay, perhaps you just need to delegate. It just means that, you have a lot on your plate. Okay, so there's a big difference between depressed or sad. There's a difference between jealous and envious. There's a difference between betrayal, being betrayed, feeling betrayed, and disappointed. I want to tell you a short anecdote, if I may. My daughter, who's 13 years old, so that's precisely the age group we're talking about here. I had a very interesting conversation with her. Once I was abroad and I called home and I spoke with her on the phone and I asked her, how her day was, stuff, and she sounded really downbeat and depressed and sad, very negative. And so I got her to talk a little bit, and she said, I feel like, my best friend betrayed me. Betrayed, that's the word she used. I said, you sure betrayed? That's a very strong word. And so I got her to talk a little bit. I asked her a few questions. She gave me a few details, and then I said, well, am I right in assuming that you're not really feeling betrayed, but you sound more as if, you're disappointed? And she said, well, yes, actually disappointed is a much better way to put it. Now, you may think, that I'm doing semantics, that I'm playing with words. I'm not. Because, what I'm driving at is, that if you feel you're being betrayed by one of your friends, okay, you're going to behave accordingly. And so evidently, if you feel like you've been betrayed by somebody, you either ignore this person or you just, it's a conflict. Okay. So, but if you're feeling you're being disappointed, being disappointed is still unpleasant, but I'm not sure that being disappointed, would trigger the same kind of behavior, the same kind of reaction that being betrayed would. You see? So the name of the game is, name it to tame it. If you don't know what it is, there's nothing you can do about it. So being able to identify with what they say, it's a certain degree, a very high degree of granularity, how you're feeling at a particular point in time is really, really important. Otherwise, you can't, you can't manage it. All right. So this is an interesting quote that I'd like to share with you. At an up-and-coming young guy who just wrote a book about this. You may recognize the name. Anybody can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy. So I'll let you draw your conclusions from this. Okay, so the first thing is identifying your feelings. The second thing is understanding, how your thoughts, your behavior is impacted, by the feeling. Okay, so that's also very important. So, and lastly, decide whether, you want to stay in that feeling. Okay, perhaps, you're feeling angry with somebody and you think, you're right feeling angry, but that's fine. I mean, if you decide, that you want to stay angry, that's fine. That's your right. Okay. But if you don't think, that being angry will result will affect, if you think, that being angry will affect the quality of your relationship with this particular person, if you care about this person, well, then you might decide that you want to step out of it, you want to shift. And so if that's the case, how are you going to do it? So this is the first exercise that I'd like to share with you. It's something that I ask my students to do. I ask them to list all emotions they've experienced in the last 24 hours, or if I see them in the afternoon, list all the emotions you've experienced all day so far, or if it's Monday morning, list all the emotions you experienced over the weekend. That's the first step. Second step, I encourage them to link them, to link their emotions to the people they met, or they were with, or events that they participated in. I felt stressed out because I had to run a marathon, but whatever. Or maybe, their emotions are linked to places that they visit. It's very important, that the students, they take some time to sort of, think things through properly. And then the third step is, I asked them to focus on one of these emotions in particular. Okay. And so and ask themselves, how is this emotion impacting my thoughts and my behavior? And then share with a friend. Okay, so it's a very, very simple but very powerful exercise, which I ask my students to do. I think, I just want to emphasize one thing that I haven't said yet. I'm not a psychologist. Okay, I've done a lot of work in psychology. I have a background in psychology. But I'm a teacher. But I think, being a teacher these days, okay, well, being a teacher was never easy to begin with, okay, but being a teacher this way, I see, that the line between being a teacher and being a psychologist with the small p, psychologist, not therapist, I think that line is very, very thin and getting thinner by the minute. So understanding, how entering the psychology of the learning process and teaching process, for me, it's a very, very important thing to do. This is interesting. I want to share with you. At the beginning of this talk, I was mentioning, the Get Involved series. The Get Involved is one of the books, published by Macmillan with the very strong cell emphasis. This is a great activity. For our teens, accepting their full self is one way to cultivate what Dr. Susan David calls emotional agility. So accepting myself is very, very important. Okay, and because it would result in that individuation process that I was mentioning before. The problem is, though, that as we know, it's very difficult for teens to accept themselves. In fact, teens are hypercritical of themselves. There's always somebody who's more good looking than they are. There's always somebody in the class who's smarter than they are. There's always somebody in the class who's better at sports, and so on and so forth. It's very, very difficult, but it's part of the process, and it will disappear. We have to remember that what researchers tell us, what psychologists tell us, that it's a very, very, very critical phase, but it doesn't last very long. So usually, kids, by age 14 or 15 have snapped out of it. So, but it is, I think, this is precisely the kind of thing, that we need to do more of in class. So helping our students, I love this, Whitman's quote, "I celebrate myself, I sing myself." Yes. Okay. We're not suggesting, everything about me is positive. Okay. So we're not talking about, positive, some positive feelings can be toxic. Okay. And I think, we can't go from one extreme to the other. Okay. So, but I think, our job is to remind students, to teach our students to step back a bit. Okay. And also to be patient. We need to be patient with teenagers. There's no other way of doing it. All right, so I want to go on to another activity that I do, which is linked to this. One of the things that kids experience during their adolescence is the low self-esteem. Okay, so when I ask my students to think about something that they're good at, they go, "I'm not good at anything." But this is because, it's linked to what I was just saying before. They don't have a very high opinion of themselves, or rather, they think they're not allowed to have a good opinion of themselves, which is not quite the same thing. But okay, this is an exercise that I asked them to do. I wouldn't do this in Asian countries, I don't think it would work very well in that culture, but I'll let everybody decide. This is what I asked them to do. I asked them to think about 3 things that they're good at. They don't need to be an expert, and it could be anything from playing tennis to cooking, or to whatever, painting, whatever. And make a list. and then let the students work in pairs, and then let the partner, pick one of the activities, from the list, and they tell each other. This is not a guessing game. And then I dictate these 4 questions. How do you know you're so good at it? What skills do you need? What advice should you give a beginner? How would you feel if you had to stop doing this? And they take it in turns, to interview each other using these questions. The rationale behind this exercise is that the students, in order for the students, to do this exercise, they need to put themselves in a situation of perceived competence. So Alfred Bandura, a psychologist at Stanford University, talks about self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is about, having positive beliefs about accomplishing a certain task. In other words, if you feel competent in a certain area, you want to talk about it. And so that enhances your motivation, that enhances, your engagement, okay? And you basically, you're working on 2 different levels. On the one hand, there's a feel-good factor. Okay, so yes, I am good at playing tennis. I can talk about it, and I want to talk about it. I want to share what I know with. And on the other hand, there's a lot of language work. Okay, because don't forget, that we're teaching language. So I said it before. Okay, so for me, the perfect kind of exercise in the language class it's an exercise that combines a language element, okay, with the psychological element. So this exercise has a very clear psychological agenda, but it also has a very clear language agenda, because students have to practice. I'm good at doing, okay, I'm a good cook, I'm a fairly good cook, okay, and so on and so forth. So that's another exercise, that it's nice and simple, okay, but it's always worked very well in my classes, and I hope you want to try it out with your own students. This is another example, from Get Involved. Really, really, really useful. So what are my strengths? Okay, what are my negative, do I have any negative thoughts about myself? It doesn't matter if the students, draw a blank. It doesn't matter, and it may be, that they don't want to share. It may be, that's fine. Even if they don't have to fill out the whole thing. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. The most important thing is that remember that the way students, especially adolescents, behave and react to what we ask them to do in class is not necessarily the way they react, when they actually think about something that the teacher asked them to do in class. I've had many. I don't teach adolescents anymore, but I did for a while, and I had many. There were many examples, of students, who were completely laid back and totally blasé or disruptive during a certain exercise. But then, I had also reasons to believe, that the way they talked about the exercise that the teacher asked them to do in class, outside class, was completely different. So remember that I've never really met a teenager say, this is a great exercise, teacher, can we do more of this? Okay, so I really love this exercise. Teenagers don't talk like that. We all know. So, and I think we should accept it. But remember, that's just playing a role. There's something else, that we can and should do in terms of communicating with our students. How many times have I said, "Oh dear, you look so tired today," or "What's wrong with you today?" or "Get on with that, you're being difficult," or "I don't understand why you don't like this. You told me you're into music, but you're not doing the exercise. You should like this." Well, if that's the way you speak, are you communicating, or are you being judgmental? Think about it for a second. It's clear to me that you're being judgmental, and so if you're being judgmental, and if you're not really, you're burning all bridges. Students, are not going to go for it. So imagine a situation where you corrected a student's essay, you give it back to them, and with a low grade, okay, and then you see that the student is looking disappointed, and you say, why are you so angry? What makes you angry? Okay, but first of all, how do you know that he or she is angry? Okay, and so why jump to conclusions? Why just assume? What I'm trying to say is that, when you make assumptions on behalf of your students, most of the time you get it wrong. And it's also, if you think about it, it's disrespectful. So what is a better way to do it? Well, what is a way to bridge this gap between being an emotion judge to being an emotion scientist? So how about this? If I suspect that my students or most of my students are tired, okay, well, instead of, me assuming and telling them, that they all look so tired today, why don't I get them to tell me? So, for example, how much energy do you have today from 0 to 5? And if they say 0, you just have to go with that. You just have to accept it and respect the answer, okay? But it may be, that not everybody is going to say 0, but maybe, most of them are going to say 3 or 4. Why is this important? Because remember what we said earlier, emotions are data. Emotions are valuable information. It may well be that based on how the students answer this particular question, I'm going to have to shuffle things around and do something completely different. Okay, it may be, that what I was planning to do with my students in that particular lesson, okay, doesn't quite match the level of energy that they have. So what do? If I just press ahead, and not take this into consideration, not take into account the way they're feeling, I may be hitting a wall. But if I take into account the way they're feeling, and I realize that, the level of energy is not quite what I was hoping for, well, then, I need to take a step back and change a few things around to make it work. That's really the way it works. So what I'm trying to suggest is, where perhaps, teachers should go from knower mode, I know you're tired, to learner mode. Okay, you tell me. I'm just trying to explore. I'm experimenting. I want to try to find out, how you're feeling, so that I can help you. So that I can teach you in the best possible way. And by best, I mean, in a way, that really matches, the way you're feeling today. So here's another exercise that I'd like to do. To find out, what sort of mood and what sort of, how much energy they have. So it goes, it works with Post-it notes. So you give a blank Post-it note, students write, I'm feeling dot, 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 because dot, dot, dot. Then they stick it on the back. Then you ask them to stand, mingle. You give out, apologies for the typo there. You give out, blank Post-its, and the students, get to reply, to as many people as they want to, and they stick their replies on people's backs. So your role during this exercise is not to step outside and get yourself a cup of coffee, but your role is just to walk around and take a look at what the students are written on the back, because again, emotions are data. And so you need to incorporate, excuse me, you need to incorporate that knowledge, okay, within your in your lesson plan. So to wrap up, the second section, okay, it's important, to help your students and train your students to pinpoint their emotions, okay, with a certain granularity. So as precisely as possible. If the students don't have the vocabulary, well, you guess what? You teach it to them, because that's what you get paid for. And then, the second step is, getting the students to understand how the emotions impact their thoughts and their behaviors. Because if they don't understand how they're feeling, if they don't understand the link between their emotions and their behavior, they can't regulate them. And so we're back to square one. All right. I'm speeding a bit because I just looked at the time. But I'm going to give you 30 seconds, not 45 seconds, 30 seconds, for if you have questions and comments, you can write them in the chat box. So I want to go from self-management, self-awareness, to people, to social awareness and social management. It basically, it all boils down to one thing. It boils down to empathy. It boils down to, cultivating meaningful human moments and cultivating moments of empathy. But I want to focus on the meaning of attention for a second. There are 3 types of attention, not just one. So when you listen to somebody, okay, so you have to think about yourself. You have to focus on your own self. How am I feeling? Am I in the right psychological state of mind? Am I in the right psychological, physical, and emotional state, to be able to pay attention to this person in front of me? Number one. Number two, can I, as a consequence, can I focus on this person? And number three, how focused am I on the environment? This is very important. So unfortunately for us, okay, it's never really been good, easy, to grab people's attention, students' attention, and help them maintain the same level of attention. Except that one thing that has happened over the last decade or so, attention is really rare. Attention is under siege, okay, and I don't have anything against technology, but technology has been a very serious challenge. So what Daniel Goleman says, what information consumes is attention. A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. This is very true. So people read. It's not that we read less, we read more, but we read differently. And so our attention span is dramatically reduced. To be fair to our teenagers, this is across the board. It's not just teens, but it's adults as well. So how can we be good listeners or bad listeners? Well, listening is showing empathy. Okay, there are three types of empathy. One is cognitive. I understand how you feel. One is emotional. I know how you feel. And the other one, and the most important one, is empathetic concern. What can I do to support you? And this is what we have to train our students in if we want them to. This is a big impact on bullyism, on all sorts of interpersonal conflicts that may arise in the group. So this is an activity that I like to do with my students. So think of a time when you discussed an important issue with a friend. And then, did you have the impression that she paid close attention to you? Was she there with you, or was she just going through the motions? Okay. And number three, what did she do or say to show empathetic concern? And how did that make you feel? That's the first step of the activity. The second step would be, think of a time when when somebody wanted to discuss an issue with you. How did you manage to pay close attention to her? What did you do or say to show her empathetic concern? And how do you think she felt, and how did you feel? Okay, so again, it's important for the kids, to understand, what it really means, to be listened to, and what it really means to listen to somebody with empathy. So there's more to say about this, but we're running out of time. Here's another one on focus. Okay, getting the students to focus. It's very, very important. It's fundamental. If you start the lesson when the students are not focused, well, then you're wasting your precious time. So this is an exercise that I do at the beginning of class, or any time during the lesson when there is a slump in attention. So I put the students in pairs, A's and B's. The B's count from 1 to 60 out loud, and the B's count down. Sorry, the A's count from 1 to 60 out loud, and the B's count down from 60 to 1 at the same time. So they need to do it at the same time, both counting out loud. Okay, so there is no language production. I know that. Okay, but it's intentional. What I want the students to do is I want them to focus. There is no way you could do this very simple exercise unless you pay attention, unless you concentrate. Okay, and concentration, so cognitive efficiency, is what I'm working on. Once the students, have refocused, have recentered, so to speak, well, then perhaps, I can start my lesson, or I can continue my lesson. So to wrap up, what is good teaching? Evidently, you need pedagogical expertise. You need to know what you're doing in class. Evidently, you need subject expertise. You need to know about the subject you're teaching, but that's just not enough. You also need to be emotionally educated. Okay, and this is what I've tried to show you this afternoon. So a lot more to talk about. I want to leave you with oh, okay, sorry. This is the final wrap up. So it's very important to understand that EI and CEL are tools, no, not a panacea. Okay, so not a quick fix. Okay, not a magic silver bullet. The goal is, to get the students, to develop, emotional agility, and to get to a balanced emotional state. And it's not a one-off. It must be taught alongside curriculum, just like it's done in Get Involved. I want to leave you with a quote that I really like. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So we don't teach exams. We don't teach grammar, we don't teach vocab, we don't teach books, we teach human beings. So teaching and learning is a fundamental a human moment. Okay, so it's a social activity. And so as such, it would be foolish of us, not to pay attention to what the research is telling us about the role and the impact of emotions on learning. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chaz. That was absolutely wonderful. Really, really wonderful webinar to watch. You put so much work into that, and I think a lot of your the work that you've done over the last few years on this has just been sort of, you've just given it away, and it's just so I think informative and helpful for everyone here who's clearly, I mean, the chat was just buzzing the whole time. People have just got so much to say about this. It's clearly on everyone's mind. I mean, they're here, but obviously it's just a really pertinent topic for everybody. So thanks again, Chaz, very much. Got time for a few questions? I have time. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Just like this morning, we've had many questions. So a few of the questions are looking at larger classes. So we've got, sometimes, I mean, it would be great if you've got sort of 10, 12 students, but sometimes people are given 30, 40, 50 plus students. Even 20 students is a challenge. Well, any number of students is a challenge, but the more there are, the higher the challenge. So any advice? I mean, you can't obviously direct your attention to students individually in that case. What would you advise? I would resort to what research tells us. I mean, what we need to shoot for in any educational setting is variety. It's providing the students with a variety of approaches, okay, and options, okay. So and choices, okay. So I think that when you have that many students, but even if you have 5 students, it would be equally difficult to do. Obviously, it's much more difficult to have 25. But because everybody learns their own idiosyncratic way, it's unreasonable to think the teacher has to adapt to 25 ways of learning. So that's why I think that if we manage to provide a sufficient degree of variety and options and choices, we can remember that it's sometimes it's not what it's done in class, but it's the thinking that takes place outside classes or in between classes that makes a really big difference. So I can give you a quote by N.S. Prabhu, the father of task-based learning. He said that teaching is at most hoping for the best. Okay. It's really messy. So there are no fast and quick recipes. So but I would underscore the value and importance of variety. Okay, cheers, Chaz. Again, mentioned a couple of times. I mean, actually, you said it on your quote. You quoted for us actually before this session, and you were talking about students not saying, "I've got this emotion" or "I am feeling this emotion." They don't just come out and tell you these things. You've got to read it for yourselves, and often it comes out in less desirable ways. And the dean has asked, how do you manage students' emotions when they strongly believe that conflicts can only be solved with their fists? Well, maybe not fists, maybe fists as well, but also, with aggression. I think, we have to come to terms with the fact, that in any group, there is group specialists, group psychologists talk about a conflict stage, the storming stage. In any group, okay, once the group has formed, okay, in any group, there is a time where there will be conflict. So the best way to deal with conflicts is to prevent it, but it's not always possible to do it. I think, that to minimize the chances of, of serious conflicts, arising in our groups is, we have to really bend over backwards and provide the students with an environment where, again, that promotes acceptance, not tolerance, but acceptance, okay, trust, okay, and also, helping the students, to find common ground. This is what group psychologists say. When the students find common ground, okay, well then, there is stronger bonding. They don't need to be friends. They don't need, that's not what it's not a dating agency. This is not what we're shooting for. But, if they find common ground, okay, well then, the chances, of a conflict are dramatically reduced. Okay. Thank you, Chaz.
Someone's asked about other literature they can read on the subject. Have you got any recommended?
Yes, that's good. Well, there's a lot. I mean, my reference would be Mark Brackett is a psychologist at Yale University. He wrote a great book called The Permission to Feel. Permission to Feel. Daniel Goleman. Anything done by Daniel Goleman on emotional intelligence is going to be relevant to what we talked about here.
Thanks. I'm just putting it in the chat box. So
Goleman.
Goldman, isn't it?
No, Goleman.
Goleman, sorry. Okay. So also several comments on students that kind of, you get the sense that they want to be able to control their emotions, but they can't. So Tamar has said, what happens when a student says that he or she don't want to behave themselves, sorry, don't want to misbehave, but they can't stop themselves?
Well, let's bear in mind, that we're not therapists. Sometimes, I would have a chat one-on-one with this person if possible, and try to understand, that I'm on his side or her side, and that we're here to support them. But I mean, there's only so much we can do as teachers. We shouldn't fall into the trap. As I said before, we're not therapists. Some people, have some serious issues, that no matter, how hard you try to implement a cell-infused program, nothing is going to work, because, they need a different type of professional help, not ours. So this is a trap, that we don't have to fall into. Okay, cell doesn't mean, that you do cheap therapy, and for one thing, you're not qualified. For second thing, you could really mess somebody up. I think the most important message for the students to get is, look, I'm not here to judge. I'm here to support you. Tell me what I can do to support you, if I can do anything, if you think I can do anything. And I think that often that's music to the students' ears, because and again, it's interesting to understand, why people are behaving the way they are. Maybe because, they've always had, this antagonistic relationship with the teacher. Maybe because, the teacher is a figure of authority. Maybe because, they have problems at home, and so maybe because they believe that that's the role that they're expected to play in class, you see. So I want to give this guy a hard time because I'm going through a rough time myself. So for as long as we don't find out why exactly, what drives somebody's behavior, we will never know whether, it is in our within our realm of knowledge, to be able to help him or her, or not. But it may well be that, that we can't help everybody. It may well be that people, some people need, they need to seek professional help.
I imagine some teachers might have difficulty with that. I think if I was seeing students
Yes.
on a regular basis and I was becoming quite, you become close to students after an amount of time, don't you? It's quite difficult to step back and go, that's not in my remit. I can't help you with that.
I think, well, if I think, we have to be honest, if that's an easy way out, I don't like it. If it's like a sincere, if the teacher is sincere, recognizes this is beyond me, I don't have the skills, I don't have the knowledge, I'm not competent enough, well, then I think it's much better to do that and refer this person, to the education psychologist or a therapist, rather than come up, with some wobbly theories and wobbly, we can seriously mess people up, and we don't have to do that. We can't do it. We're not allowed to do that.
That's really powerful. Thanks for putting that message out there, Chas. That's a really important thing, I think, for people to hear. So thanks.
Yeah. There's only so much we can do, and let's not forget, I didn't mention this in the talk, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory that, that we need to be able to manage our own emotions as well. So teachers, this is a hard times for teachers too. Staggering numbers of teachers, quitting the profession. In France, 3,000, and in France where I'm based, 3,250 teaching vacancies last year, haven't been filled.
Wow.
So yeah, but ask yourself why. It's because of the stress, because of the anxiety, because everybody's going through a really, really rough time. So we need to take care of ourselves if we want to help the students take care of themselves as well. So it's not easy. It's as I was saying, you know, it's a long term. You can only plant seeds and hope, you know, that one day or other, you know, something will come up, but there are no guarantees.
No. Thanks so much, Chaz. I think we've taken enough of your time. There are lots more questions. I've made a note of them. I know you wanted to keep a record of them, so I've got them for you. Don't worry, I'll get them to you.
Is that okay if I leave my email, just in case, you know, people
Yeah. Please do.
And I've had to cut a few corners because I realized, you know, I was running out of time. So if you guys, you know, have questions, you know, that I didn't have the time to address here, I'm not saying, you know, I haven't an answer to everybody, but I could certainly try and see, you know, if I could come up with something that makes sense to you. Thank you very much.
Good of you, Chaz. Thanks for putting it out there. Okay, so we're not finished just yet. If you give me a second.
Do you want me to? I know. Okay, I stopped sharing my screen. Yeah.
If you could, Chaz, thank you. Yeah, you've already done it. Yeah.
No, you're on. I stopped sharing my screen.
God, there's so many buttons to press.
Hmm?
There we go. Lots of buttons to press. So, as Chaz has mentioned before, Get Involved has got social emotional learning at its core. It's practices throughout the course how to, as Chaz was talking about, make sure that students feel included in that class, that they are paid attention to by themselves and by others, and they feel they should be there. They feel accepted, not loved. They don't need to be loved. As Chaz was saying, they don't need to be loved by all of the other students. They don't need to love each other, but they need to feel and be accepted. Get Involved has got that throughout the course. Of course, it deals with things like grammar, vocabulary, and your English language, what you would expect in an English language course in terms of the language, but it also has an approach which tries to help every student feel included, and that your environment in the classroom is an inclusive space for students to be able to express their emotions and be open to all sorts of things when it comes to learning a language. So Chaz has used some examples. It also focuses on linguistic developments and super skills or life skills. It looks at real life issues. It's also got a collaborative project at the end of the units.